To start with, I'm going to be sewing the pockets. So I've got the pocket add-on to my Phoebe freebie, which is the whole front leg and the pocket pieces. So I'm going to put the pocket pieces on right sides together, like so. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, and I like to do a technique that's called chaining on. So I'm going to start off by sewing this curved pocket edge. Now the fabric I'm using is a little bit tricky. It's a silk crepe de chine and it moves a little bit, but it's not too bad. So I'm sewing the curved edge of the pocket first. So I'm going to sew from the bottom side seam up to the top. My 1 centimetre 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to sew from the top down to the bottom on the other side. Be careful not to stretch this seam. It is off grain and it would be very easy to stretch it, but if you do, then it's going to wave on your body. Back tacking. Now I'm going to snip to release the first piece that I did. So here you can see I've got the pocket bag sitting on top of the front, right sides together. Now I'm going to just peel this pocket bag over so it's right side up, and I've got my seam allowance here, and I want the seam allowance sitting underneath the pocket bag, and I'm going to chain on again and edge stitch along the seam. Now I don't need to back tack on this. So I'm going to go snip that, release the other half. There's my pocket bag sitting on top. I'm going to peel that back so that seam allowance is underneath the pocket bag, and again I'm going to chain on down that seam that I've just sewn, and I can take that out. So you can see I've top stitched it. The pocket bag is here, the seam allowance is facing that way. It's a sufficiently straight seam that I don't need to trim that or snip into it. Now what I need to do is press that seam, and that edge stitching is going to really help roll the pocket bag onto the inside. On your pocket bag notch you've got notches, which I just do little snips, and so what I'm going to do is when I'm pressing that, after I've pressed that seam, I'm going to fold that in half at that notch and press down that edge as well. Okay, I've pressed that edge of the pocket and you can see it's nice and crisp, it's rolled in nicely. Where I had my snip, I folded that and pressed down the side of the pocket, and I've just pinned that into place on that top edge of the trouser. Next, what we need to do is sew the bottom edge of the pocket bag. You could, if you wanted to, do a French seam on this, but I'm just going to do a regular seam and overlock it because that's what I've done in the instructions. So, back tacking and sewing along. And again, I'm going to chain on. So I went from fold to seam, and this time I'm just going to do seam to fold. Back tack, take it out, snip to release, and overlock. I've sewn and overlocked the bottom edge of my pocket. Now I'm just going to stay stitch it in place. So I'm going to lift the foot, and this is the side, so I'm just going to, very close to the edge, just about 3 millimeters, I'm going to sew up this edge to catch the pocket in place so it doesn't shift when I'm sewing, particularly with such a slippery fabric. Now you can see the pocket edge is sitting nice and flat, so I'm just going to take this pin out and I'm going to rest it on the edge so that as I get to the foot that comes over that bump, it's going to stay nice and flat. Now whilst the folded edge of the pocket is there, I could stop, but you know how much I like to chain on, so I'm going to just carry along that front, and I'm going to get the other half and carry on until I get to that pocket edge, And I'm just going to take the pin out to make sure it's nice and flat and sitting evenly, which it is. Sewing along this edge, get to that corner and pivot and come down the side seam. So again, when I'm getting to that pocket edge, I want to make sure that the seam is nice and flat. Get to that edge, and I'm just putting my fingers on each side of it and then using the pin to rest on it as I go over it, but I'm not actually sewing over the top of the pin because that would potentially chip my needle. Sewing to the edge of the pocket where the overlocking is, and take it out of the machine, and I'll just snip that centre front. And so there, this fabric's quite sheer, you can probably even see the pocket bag through it. And that's the pocket bag done. Now we're going to sew the legs. I'm going to take the back section of the trouser and pop it on top of the front section, right sides together, like so. Now I'm going to start off with my side seam. I'm going to line up the top sections, back tack, and I'm just going to sew all along this edge. So what I like to do is anchor it first under the foot of the sewing machine, come down to the hem and come up about sort of 30 centimetres or so and pop a pin in. Give that a little pull, and that's the only pin I'm going to use. Sew down. I always say sewing's a bit like braille in that you use your fingers to tell you what's going on underneath. So I'm feeling to check that my pocket hasn't folded up at all and it's still nice and flat. Carry on down to there. Hold that nice and firmly again. Carry on down. Pinching the hem together. And sewing to the edge. Now I'm going to chain on again, and I'm going to do the inside leg. So I'm starting at the hem. I'm going to start sewing, snip the thread to release that edge. Again, I've got it sitting underneath the foot, so I know that it's nice and secure, and I'm coming up to the crotch, and I'm just going to pop a pin in here. So even though this is a slippery fabric, this is still working, and I'm just going to sew up a little way on this inside leg, and then can reach the pin there, and I just give that a little pull, snaps into place. Carry on sewing. Up to the crotch. And there's a little overlap there because the point at where I finish is actually the intersection of the fabric. I'm not worried about this bit up here. It's that intersection which is exactly at my seam allowance. Now I'm going to chain on, and this time I'm starting with the crotch on the other side. So lining up those two pieces, I have my little overlap because it's the intersection which is my seam allowance point. Carry on sewing. Sew down a little way, and then I can snip to remove the other leg. Match the hem, come up about 30 centimetres, pop a pin in. When I pin, I always pin perpendicular to the seam. That allows me to just easily take the pin out when I'm sewing, rather than if I had the pin going straight like this, it kind of makes it lumpy and it's harder to manage, whereas this is a really natural way of being able to take the pin out as you're sewing. now I've sewn the side seam and inside leg seam of both legs, and I'm going to overlock those. So I've overlocked my side seams and my inside leg seam, and I've pressed the side seams towards the back so that the pocket will sit nice and flat. Now I'm going to do the crotch seam. So to do that, I'm going to take one leg and turn it through to the right side. Then I'm going to take the other leg from the top, and I'm going to slide the other leg down towards the hem. So I've got one leg inside the other. I'm going to start off by matching the crotch seam. So there's the crotch seam, and I'm just going to put a pin in so that they're perfectly matched. Then I'm going to come round to the front, joining up that centre front at the waist, and I'm just going to sew the crotch seam, so back tacking, just pinching it where I've got the pin for my crotch, sewing down. Again, I don't want to stretch this at all, so I'm at the crotch here and I'm just curving that around, and because of the direction I'm going, my seam is pressed towards the back on that inside seam, so it's easy for me to do. I'm going to just take the centre back seam, come down a little way, pop a pin in so that I can easily match that crotch curve where it's really off grain. And coming up to that centre waist. Back tacking and coming out. So now I'm going to overlock that crotch seam and give it a press. Now I'm going to hem the trousers. I like to have a deep hem, so I've given myself an 8 cm seam allowance for the hem, but the pattern is designed for you to lengthen or shorten the trousers as you like and to create the kind of hem that you want. So with this fabric, it's light, so having a deep hem is going to make it hang beautifully. So again, I'm going to use my friction pen. I'm going to mark the 8 centimetres onto the fabric because I know this will disappear, but in any case, this line will be the fold. I'm going to draw that on there, and I'm going to flip it over, mark 8 centimetres, and draw the line on. I've already overlocked the hem on the right side, so I'm just going to turn the hem up and snap it along that fold, and I always start my hem sewing from the inside leg, so I know where that is because I've overlocked it from the inside leg, and I'm just going to stitch in the middle of the overlocking. So I've got that folded on my line, and again this eliminates the need for pinning. I always figure the less pins you use, the faster you can sew. So you can see, even with a tricky fabric like this, it's fine. Little back tack, just a few stitches, trim the threads. Now you can see it's all along the fold line, and that's ready for a press, and I'm going to do the other leg. Okay, I've pressed the hem and it looks nice and neat. So my preference is always to sew the hem like this rather than pressing the hem and then sewing it, because if my stitch line wobbles a bit or the fabric moves by a millimetre or two, it doesn't matter because when I've pressed it, it's going to sit flat. But if I had pressed this beforehand and it had moved slightly, then my seam might have just sort of moved a little bit, then the crease would have been permanently made onto the outer fabric. So this is just going to give you a neat result. So my Phoebe trousers are just about finished. They're now ready to either have a waistband put on and be made into trousers, or a top put on and made into a jumpsuit. So in this instance, I'm doing the shirred top to make it into a jumpsuit. So on my shirred top, I have marked the center points with a little notch. I don't need to mark the side seams because they have a seam. And now I'm going to pin this onto the waistband of the trousers. So to do this, I want to turn the top inside out, and I'm going to slide my hand through the top, and I'm going to just grab the top of the trousers, making sure my fronts and backs are lined up. And where that pin is, I know that that's the center front. So the center front of my trousers has a seam, so I'm going to put a pin on there. The centre back of the trousers has a seam, so I will join that onto the pin for the centre of the top. And then the sides also both have seams, so they're really easy to match up. So this is called marking your quarter points. So pinning that one. And now I'm ready to sew. So it's quite tricky sewing with the shirring already attached. You're just going to have to stretch it out as you go. So I'm going to put it under my sewing machine. Do a few stitches to hold it in place, and I just like to have the needle down when I'm working with stretchy fabrics, and I'm just going to give 1/4 a little pull like this. And I'm going to stitch along, pulling that into position. Now, if for whatever reason you find that the shirred top is kind of pleating a little bit because of the gathers, that's fine. Don't worry about it, because they're just going to all gather up anyway because of the elastication. So you don't need to fixate it. And there we have it. I've sewn around in a ring, and that just needs to be overlocked and pressed, and we are done. So here is the finished jumpsuit and all pressed. So it looks kind of funny when it's like this because the shirring has pulled everything in so much, but when it's on, it just looks great. So what do you think? Here it is, all made up, and I think it's really flattering. The shirring, as you can see, stretches to fit beautifully, and made up in this lovely silk crepe de chine. It just falls beautifully, feels super comfy, great. It could be used for evening, or I could dress it down with some wooden beads and things, or I could wear it with my new Beverly wrap. This one has a trompe l'oeil collar and contrasting welts. Pop that on, what a nice little evening outfit, don't you think?